We started this WNBA season back on May 16th with 12 teams across the country battling it out and battling their way through the season to get to where we are now, folks, and that is the 2014 WNBA Finals. Good evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome to the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks on WNBA 365 Finals Centrals. We get you folks ready for tomorrow night's Game 1 between the Chicago Sky and Phoenix Mercury. Good evening, folks. Callan McClurg joining you folks here from Studio 171 in San Diego. That man on Apple's FaceTime on my computer desk is Chris Woodmansee from the Earnhardt Studios up in Anaheim, California. Chris, good evening. How is it going tonight?
Not much, just hanging here, just getting excited for tonight at 10:30.
Now, folks, again, we're doing another doubleheader here, basically, here on YouTube, and then, of course, at 10:30 with Episode 4 already of WNBA Radio, folks. We will be joined by esteemed WNBA and women's basketball writer Sue Favor from Hoopism on Twitter. Sue will be dropping by to the show, and, folks, possibly I could be in the running for an interview with a very, very special athlete sometime very soon. We're working on that still in the coming days or so. But, Chris, like we said, though, man, we started this WNBA season, Chris, back in May with 12 teams looking for long-lost WNBA titles, whether it's going to be their third in franchise history or maybe even the first, Chris. And as the season went on, man, we went from 12 to 8 to 4 down to the final 2, Chris. We have come here, Chris. And as we look back at the season, man, you know, a lot of things, you know, happened during the season. You know, the rookie class was phenomenal this year between Shoni Schimmel and Odyssey Sims and Kayla McBride doing their part. And then, of course, the seasoned vets of Candace Parker and Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Swin Cash, Tamika Catchings, among others, Chris. Chris, as we look back a bit at the regular season, man, what is like your highlight, basically, of the season? Again, knowing that this could have been a year where, you know, there may have been a year of transition, you know, where we have 12 teams, 11 teams, or where the league even be around after what occurred over the offseason, Chris. But, Chris, as we do look back at the regular season up until where we're at now, Chris, your lasting thoughts about, you know, how fun of a year this was for the WNBA as far as, you know, the play on the court, you know, the ratings going up on television for the second straight year, fan attendance picking up, Chris. Your lasting thoughts, though, Chris, about the 2014 WNBA season as a whole, Chris, from the draft all the way to where we're at now.
Just a great season for the 2014 WNBA, a great season from the draft, the season, the attendance going up, just keep it through until next season and everything, just keep it going up, the attendance, the draft and everything, get more people to watch the WNBA and to watch it.
Chris, I was going back and I was watching an old interview that was with Candace Parker on FSN Prime Ticket with Michael Eaves held during her rookie season, Chris. And, Chris, Candace brought up this point that she made that she sort of relates the WNBA to how the NBA was, Chris, back in the 1970s. Because at that time, Chris, there really was no identity for the league as regards to, like, you know, a certain player or a team, Chris, that you can sort of, you know, hang with until we had Bird and Magic re-sparked the NBA, Chris. And that's kind of a point, Chris, that I like to drive home a lot, too, is, you know, the WNBA, Chris, is still searching for its identity, Chris. And I believe, though, after last season, with, you know, the increase in viewership and attendance last season, but then, Chris, building off of last year and the numbers going up, okay, maybe not by, like, a big margin, but, you know, Chris, though, to know, though, Chris, there's slight growth. You know, every year so far, Chris, there's been increased growth across television, across social media, in-game attendance, merchandise sales, Chris. You know, it's 2 positive seasons, Chris, that I think the WNBA is on the right track, Chris. Now, I think they may have to. I think, Chris, that they may have to start getting more sponsorship in. I know that Boost Mobile and State Farm have done a great job, Chris, but you might want to try to get out to, you know, like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or some car dealerships. I mean, I think, Chris, it looks like Kia's been involved here with the WNBA because they've had their advertisements across the baselines in front of each bench. So, Chris, I think this year, though, was, you know, Chris, probably is one of the more memorable years for me as in regards to being, you know, a 10-year WNBA veteran covering the sport, Chris. Now, it's probably not as big as it was when we had Diana Taurasi come in 04, when we had Parker coming in 2008, Chris. But 2014 is probably going to be the best year out of my tenures covering the league, Chris, because for one, I got to go to 2 games this year as a bragging right here, basically, two games so far. And, Chris, I mean, to go to a game, though, man, I mean, the in-arena attendance, Chris, kind of spoke volumes to me, Chris, because as we know on television, man, you only see one side of the arena. You only see, the one facing the scores table, Chris, where if you're live, you can see everything, Chris. And I saw, at least 10,000 at both games I was at, families, single ladies, old ladies, guys, and their, couples were there, Chris. So Chris, it looks like it's finally kind of registering that it's okay for people to watch the WNBA, Chris, not just amongst you and me and everyone else across the league, Chris, but like average sports fans, Chris. For instance, Chris, I'll use my dad as an example, Chris, because he, for one, was at the time not a big women's basketball fan, Chris. He would only watch it during the Olympic Games because it was Team USA versus the Globe. Where when we went to the game on my birthday, Chris, he was engaged, got involved, and was, cheering and applauding, Chris. So what are you hoping for the WNBA to build off of this year, Chris, going forward to 2015?
Have to build really great support, get more people, like men or different people to watch the WNBA and to watch it, love it, and just tell people about the WNBA and to get more people.
So with that, folks, we will go to the talking point here that we need to make. That right now, again, is that we are right now, folks, on the eve of the 2014 WNBA Finals, best 3 out of 5 here in the series, between the Eastern Conference champion, number 4 seed Chicago Sky, and the Western Conference champion, number 1 seed Phoenix Mercury. Chris, there is one big talking point around both clubs before we go to Game 1, Chris, is right now the health of Elena Delle Donne, Chris. Now, Chris, Elena tried her best to play in Game 3 in Indiana, Chris. She was very, very, very not herself. Didn't have her A game, Chris. So, Chris, if you now, Chris, I know that that Chicago did take Game 3, Chris, but if in fact Delle Donne does not play, or if she has the same sort of performance, Chris, is the young Chicago Sky, who's right now, Chris, very playoff inexperienced, are they in trouble against right now, Chris, which is basically Goliath of the WNBA, Chris, being the Phoenix Mercury right now?
Probably they are, but just pretty much this whole playoffs, they're down, but they come back, never count them out, so just don't know about this Chicago Sky team, because pretty much this whole playoffs, they have this never say never attitude. Just we'll see tomorrow.
Chris, I think the game weighs heavily on Elena Delle Donne's health, Chris. If she does not play or if she's not herself, Chris, regardless, if as much as you want to, not see the Mercury win, Chris, if Elena Delle Donne does not play or she's not herself, Chris, Chicago is in trouble. Now, on that side of the story, Chris, I mean, I'm not saying the series is over in a sweep, Chris. I mean, I think it goes 4, maybe 5. But, I mean, I think that the Mercury being such a veteran team, being a veteran team, and, again, really having no flaws in their game all season, going 29-5 and only having 1 loss at home, that does not say, folks, I'm counting out Chicago either way, because what they have done has been remarkable, folks, and reminding all of us, at least, about that 2012 Indiana Fever team that had struggled all regular season, got in the back door and won the WNBA title over the Minnesota Lynx in pretty convincing fashion. So, Chris, I mean, does it have a Hollywood-type ending? Personally, I don't think it will. Do I want to see it? Chris, who out there doesn't like to see underdog teams perform well or even win, the big prize? So, I mean, at this point, though, I'm leaning a bit towards Phoenix, Chris, but I know very well, though, that the Sky can, snap of a finger, get back in the game here. So, again, folks, Game 1 tomorrow afternoon, 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific time. Game will be played on ABC tomorrow afternoon from the U.S. Airways Center in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. Chris, speaking of Sue Favor, Sue does have a link to a story here we're going to read from ESPNW.com's Michelle Volpel, and it's Michelle's 5 questions for the finals. Question 1, Chris asks, how can the Sky turn the series into a extended revival episode of Chicago Hope? Chris, it says, it sounds breathtakingly obvious, but we'll pound it home more. The Sky simply have to win at least one of the first 2 games in Phoenix. Chris, I believe that is the only hurdle, Chris, that the Sky will face at this point in time, Chris, is somehow, some way, winning in that daunting house of horrors for the WNBA is U.S. Airways Center, Chris. If they can pull off one win out of there, I give them a fighting shot, Chris. But if they go down 0-2 in Phoenix, it might be over with because, you know, the Mercury have not really. They've had one little red flag on them at home this season, which was to the San Antonio Stars, Chris. But with that fan base, Chris, you know, having 10 to 12,000 every game, they're loud and rowdy and out of control, and they're one of the, you know, most loyal fan bases in the league, Chris. Chicago has to win tomorrow or win Tuesday, Chris, or your prediction of the Sky winning, Chris, might be down the drain and gone. How big, though, is Game 1 and Game 2 for Chicago looking ahead to Sunday and Tuesday right now?
Chicago either needs to win at least one of those games in Phoenix, because if they lose both games, going back to Chicago down 0-2, it's going to be really tough and challenging to a very experienced team, like you said, in the playoffs. And they just need to at least take one or win both, and you're looking pretty good. But down 0-2, you're not looking pretty good.
Yeah, Chris, I feel like Chicago takes Game 2 because they've been really good in winning Game 2s in both playoff series to force the Game 3. But, Chris, here we have 3 out of 5 now, so you don't have to really worry about Game 2. You have to more so worry about Game 3 back in Chicago. But, Chris, I mean, if Chicago wins one of the 2 games in Phoenix, you're looking okay. If you drop both, though, like we both said, Chris, you're really in trouble. Question 2, Chris, about that Taurasi character. What do you do to contain her, Chris? Chris, there's nothing you can do to stop Diana Taurasi. When she gets hot, she's on fire for the whole game, and there's no slowing her down, Chris. As we saw very well in Game 1 when she beat down the Sparks, putting up 32 points. Even the home opener, Chris, when she dropped 23, made her first 5 shots. You can't slow her down, Chris. When she gets in her groove, you're really in trouble if that happens, Chris. Is there any way for anybody here to slow down Taurasi at all in your mind, or no, or what?
Pretty much no one can stop her.
Yeah, that's why she's one of the best players in the game. That's why she's got 2 rings. Question 3 is, how do you slow down the rest of the Mercury offense? Chris, the only point you have to make here is Chicago cannot allow the Mercury to get their shots off from their sweet spots, Chris. And also, you got to get Griner in foul trouble, Chris. If you do not get Griner in foul trouble early, it'll be a long, long day at the office, Chris, because when I saw Griner play in L.A., Chris, she got in foul trouble early, and there was a chance where she could have fouled out in the game late in the contest. But, Chris, it's not just Taurasi, though, man. You got to worry about Griner down low inside the paint, underneath the basket. Dewana Bonner from her spots. Candice Dupree from the free throw line, basically, and, the corners, Chris. So, Chris, it's more than Taurasi, Chris. You can't let the Mercury players, though, Chris, get the ball in their sweet spots. Or, above all, Chris, you got to play lockdown defense on Griner. What do you think?
Yep, agree. Play lockdown defense on Griner.
We will see if that works. Question 4, Chris asks, do we have some love for the Sky? Chris, of course we have love for the Sky, a lot of it. Who can't feel good for Sylvia Fowles, who went to a college program at LSU where she made the Final Four each of her first years, to a WNBA team that didn't make a playoff appearance to her 6th year in the league, Chris. I'll tell you what, and of course, Chris, there is that, sort of that X factor off the bench for the Sky, which is, the reigning WNBA 6th Woman of the Year recipient, Chris, which would be Allie Quigley, who went off in Game 3 against Indiana. So, there's that side of the story, Chris. But like we said, though, Chris, is, Chicago has not been favored by anybody but us two all playoff series long. Maybe Shorty said it, I think, a while back. Okay, so it was her, it was you, me, and Shorty that would pick Chicago to get to where they're at, Chris. But, Chris, it just seems like, though, all playoffs here, sort of like, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more, basically, is what they're saying with the Sky here, Chris. Why do you think, though, Chris, that no one has given the Sky enough love and credit for what they've done so far in the postseason?
Pretty much since they were the 4th seed, and then where they were the number 1 seed before the season, and then went down the drain pretty much once that game where they got destroyed at home against our Sparks. And then with EDD pretty much up a lot this season, then went like all the way, like the Sky has fallen down, and like last season where they're number 1 seed and they just got swept. Just no one didn't give them credit.
Chris, the last question is one that we already already discussed here, which was how big of an X factor will Deladon be? Chris, she is their X factor, facing the X factor inside of U.S. Airways Center. One of the X factor is one of the greatest and most loyal fan bases across the WNBA. Chris, if Elena, again, man, like we said earlier in the show, if she is not her best, if she either does not play at all or has to sit out a whole quarter for her back, again, they are in trouble, Chris, because Big still can't do it all inside. You really, Chris, can't rely on your bench players a lot to continue to score points like we saw with Allie Quigley last time out in Game 3 against the Fever, Chris. But again, man, I'll ask you again like we did earlier, but again, how big is Elena Deladon's role in this game right now at this point in time?
Very big against this Phoenix Mercury team.
So with that, folks, those are the 5 questions heading into the WNBA Finals. Again, folks, Game 1 tips off tomorrow night, or afternoon, I should say, at least 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 PAC on ABC. 1, 2, 3. Now, Chris, I know that I was watching the San Diego State UNC football game today, Chris, which I know that my Aztecs went down in a kind of a heartbreaking loss today, Chris. But I did have to ask one of my favorite players out there, Chris, a UNC alum, if she was watching the game too, Chris. That would be Washington Mystics guard and forward Ivory Latta, Chris, who told me on Twitter, yeah, I was ready, #Go Heels. So good to see, though, that Ivory watched. And, folks, I know that I kind of have a cliffhanger here that I might be having an interview with a pro athlete sometime soon. I already told Chris, folks, but I can't say it yet because I haven't really locked down the details just yet. So wait a bit longer until maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday at the latest, maybe Tuesday. But, Chris, as we get ready here to head out of here for the night, Chris, again, coming up at 10:30 p.m., Blog Talk Radio for WNBA Radio. Episode 4, folks, coming up tonight on Blog Talk Radio. We have the link for you folks down below in the box on this episode here of WNBA 365. Chris, we have a great action-packed show. We've got Sue Favor, the great WNBA writer and women's basketball blogger from hoopism.com, coming onto our show tonight to talk about the finals and also, Chris, talk about the LA Sparks season, Chris, because Sue does live in Los Angeles and is basically at every Sparks game, Chris. Chris, now I know that I told you that James Bowman of SwitchField.com favored our tweet about having Sue on, Chris. So do you think that after this, will Sue start pushing some buttons for us and will we have some more writers on very, very soon?
Yeah, I think Sue probably is. We never know, probably tonight. We'll find out during the show what's going to happen, and we'll see.
So again, folks, Blog Talk Radio, Episode 4 for WNBA Radio. Already, folks, 4 episodes already here for the show. And, folks, the numbers continue to stagger me as I look at the stats from our previous 3 shows on BTR. Great core of listeners, great core of callers over the past 3 shows. Everything's been very, very good so far right now at this point in time. As I go to the numbers real quick, folks, and the numbers are very, very nice. We've had 111 total listens. 53 times we've been listening live, folks, and 58 times we have been downloaded on iTunes. So we thank everyone for their support of WNBA Radio. And again, folks, Episode 4 tonight was Sue Favor as our special guest, coming up at 10:30 right here, or not right here. We'll be on blogtalkradio.com. Coming up at the bottom of the hour. But, Chris, as we do close out of here for the night, what are your last thoughts about the season? And also, man, Game 1 tomorrow, Sky and the Mercury for the WNBA title tomorrow afternoon. What do you got?
Just a great season. This season, the 2014 season. And just can't wait for tomorrow for Game 1 of 2014 WNBA playoffs between the Sky and the Mercury. Just can't wait.
So with that, folks, we will call it a night here. But, folks, don't go anywhere. You guys can go to the listening page for Blog Talk Radio. Again, the link is down below in the box of the video here, folks. So with that, folks, we'll call it a night here on the channel and head on over to BTR, folks, with WNBA Radio Episode 4. Sue Favor, one of our favorite WNBA writers, coming up next on Blog Talk Radio, folks. Until then, have a safe night. Drive home safely for coming, and good night now. This has been the LA Sparks 365 Network. We are Sparks. We are LA. We certainly are, but WNBA. We will be back on, folks, tomorrow night at 10 o'clock to recap Game 1 of the WNBA Finals. Till then, folks, see you folks tomorrow. Bye-bye.